So you're
So
just like an Oberlin.
yeah, so I was doing the thing in Oberlin, and it focused on it's a festival run by, I believe it's still going on, it's the Oberlin Trumpet Seminar run by Arto Hoonwig and Roy Poper, who's a professor at Oberlin. But someone there, I think is a great trumpet player, Joel Brennan, who's now teaching in Melbourne, Australia. But he played a piece called Icarus Wept by Jim Mobley.
Right.
And it was the first piece with electronics I ever heard. It's for trumpet and electronics. And I just thought it was the coolest shit I'd ever heard. I mean, I had no idea what was going on, but I knew it was amazing.
Right.
So then, fast forward a few years, I ended up going to University of Missouri, Kansas City, the Conservatory of Music and Dance there, and Jim Mobley is a professor there. Total coincidence.
Right.
And I study trumpet and composition there. And the piece Icarus Wept was written for my trumpet teacher there,
Right.
and so that was kind of like a neat coincidence. But UMKC is a great school for composition and, in particular, electronics, with Jim Mobley and Paul Rudy.
Yeah, I've had friends who wanted to go in that direction.
Yeah.
Target that school in particular, and I was like, what?
Yeah, and it's in Kansas City, especially recently, has become like a really hot center for the arts, and so it's a really great time there. I had access to electronic studios and classes about it. And then another kind of story that evolved at the same time. So I was studying trumpet and composition, and I was kind of hitting a wall at probably sophomore year about my composition. It was fine, but I didn't really feel like I was as excited about it. And trumpet, I was kind of hitting the wall, and I was doing the excerpts, etudes, the standard.
Yeah, that's a weird situation to be in, because like if you're doing that like seriously, you obviously you had a specific amount of talent that you had in high school, and then you were probably the best at what you did in high school, and then you go off and you do this, and now it's like, oh, if I don't really get in on this, like I'm not gonna ever be able to support myself ever. And it's and then there's always this wall you hit when you go off, because like you're like, you plateau, and it takes a while to jump it, and start that again.
Yeah, and so I don't know why, as a composer, but I never considered, or I never entertained the possibility of writing for myself.
I think people just assume that you're gonna write for other people.
That, and I think trumpet was the only instrument, maybe piano, because I've said piano quite a bit, but really trumpet was the only instrument I really knew. And I really knew so much bad trumpet music that I was terrified to write for trumpet to contribute to that that strong tradition of
terrible solo music that everyone has to play.
And but I actually, shortly after I started writing for electronics, I'd done some fixed media pieces. I had an opportunity to write for myself, and it was one of the first pieces I was writing, and I knew it was going to be performed at a certain time. And it just kind of clicked, like, oh, I can perform music that's interesting to me,
right,
and that challenges me. And then that really kind of kicked off my interest in performing new music in general. And that's really what as a performer, I love doing.
Well, it's interesting. I was talking to Sam Jones, of course, who was on the show 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, and we were talking about trumpet music in particular, and there being like there's like a golden age of trumpet music that was from like 1600 to like 1790, or maybe starting a little later, but you got all the Bach, the Albinoni, and the Vivaldi, all this stuff with really great, and then you go through the Romantic period, and there's just
the Dark Ages,
not a lot. And even in the early 20th century, I mean, you've got Artunian, hooray,
yeah.
And then but then in the 50s and 1950s, 1960s, there being like all these composers, like these new music, or 20th century music titans, who were like, hey, trumpet can do this cool stuff.
Yeah.
Still, you haven't been writing for it. Yeah. But here you go.
Yeah, I think that's are really interesting. And I'm good friends with Sam, and we've talked about this. And I listened to the past show, and I think it's really interesting. And we're having this huge, almost glut of new music, and
Right.
it creates this interesting problem with performers that we need to sort through it and find the 10% that really is great, and it's totally there.
Yeah.
Masterpieces for trumpet are being written now, and have been in the past 60 years.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Like I feel like across any instrument, no matter how much is written for it, like it's roughly the same percentage of those pieces that end up being really great. Like, sure, violinists have, or cellists, or whatever you want to say, piano. They have so many like masterpieces to choose from.
Yeah.
But there are literally hundreds of thousands of pieces, that are just awful.
There's probably like, I don't know, I always kind of like 10% rule is going to be great, but there's probably, I would say even more, there's probably like 20 pieces that are just terrible for every great piece for any instrument.
And yeah, so like for me, trombone, I pretty much hate all of the standard rep.
Yeah.
I just don't like it. A lot of it's pretty but because that's all there was. But there's a few that are really great, but there's only a handful of them. No. But then on the other hand, there's just not that many that have been written at all. That kind of thing.
Yeah. And this is kind of a tangent off of that, but I've thought about this a lot, and just, I mean, you've had this, it's a very strong personal experience. I think any brass player interested in new or interesting music experiences, but so I've been thinking a lot about like, okay, so we have new music and we're commissioning pieces and playing new pieces, so 90% of them are going to suck. That's fine.
Which is a bummer for the people who are paying for them.
It is, but it's our responsibility as musicians today to play those. And so I don't have like a set rule, but when I commission a piece now, my goal is for like 1 year or maybe 2 years, I'm going to try to play it every chance I get.
Right.
And do everything I can to give it a life. And then if I really don't like it after that, I'm just like, okay, I did my best. And then sometimes the pieces I really don't like, and that's fine. They'll be fine, or just after a while I grow tired of them. But someone else will pick it up, and that's great. So that piece has life. Or there's a piece that I think is going to be like actually like part of our canon, and then no one else is interested. But I can still play it. So I think it's really interesting when you think about a life of a piece of music.
Yeah,
it's kind of set of instructions and
with as a soloist, like if you're mainly doing, whether you're writing for yourself or commissioning it, like that soloist mentality is very interesting, because that's there's only been one trombonist ever who's like only been a soloist. I mean, he mostly conducts, but he spent 30 years as the world's only professional solo trombonist. This is Christian Lindbergh, of course. He's very well known. He owns his own little private island off of Sweden because he's made so much money. But like he's recorded probably 50 solo trombone albums. Maybe more. And you go through some of the, and of course his early albums are all the standards. But then you there's like this sweet spot of like 20 years of albums that are all stuff that he commissioned. New piece, like he somehow got Xenakis to write him a piece like right at the end of his life, and like all these different things. And most of them, their only proof of existence is on his solo records. But there's a couple. Like there's a couple that like, but yeah, it's a whole whole different approach when you're like a soloist commissioning these things.
And I think interesting point people don't realize, or maybe younger musicians or people in school if they're not exposed to music, is that this entire can of music, even all the crappy stuff for trumpet, like took a lot of effort to produce, and like it just didn't happen by accident. Someone commissioned, or the composer chose to wrote it and put it out there, and it takes a lot of work to keep developing this, and I think it's a huge responsibility we all have.
And sometimes it's not, like, even though it's being premiered, it's not necessarily finished.
Oh yeah, trust me, I know.
Like you run into this thing like where you kind of people expect these pieces to be done when they're done. You know, like when they're performed. Like,
No.
you know, 100. You know, you're doing another. Say you're doing another performance of Tchaikovsky's Fourth Symphony. That's
Yeah.
been in the repertoire for over 100. You know, for like
Mhm.
150 years. I love it. You know,
Yeah.
that's one of the few symphonies that or orchestral symphonies
Yeah.
that I just absolutely love. No, you know, no reservations.
Hmm.
But it's been set for like 100+ years.
Yeah.
It you know, I'm sure you can find drafts of that piece that are like, what was he doing
Yeah.
there? You know, so and nowadays, like without, um, you know, with there are very few composers who are like actively getting, you know, their pieces performed
Hmm.
by large groups like that. You know,
Hmm.
it's just
Yeah.
it's just like so you're forced to, as a composer to kind of, okay, I'll get it performed here, and then I'll play with it some more, and then I'll
Mhm.
get it performed somewhere else, and just because there's not a pipeline where you're providing this music for one group or one person, you
Yeah,
know.
and it's hard when, especially when you think about a piece, like I said, like having a life. It's kind of like this own organism. It is going to evolve and change over its lifetime.
Hmm.
Um, for example, like working at Boozy, like John Adams, who's arguably one of the most successful composers of like classical art music
Yeah.
today. Um, he's constantly revising. I mean, we get lots of revisions from him and like making sure people have the latest works. But so, I mean, you would think, and he's like fully in like the mature prime of his career, that like he could finish a piece and it would be done. But like, I don't think that's the nature of writing music.
Yeah.
But it is really hard as a composer who's emerging or doesn't have as access to many opportunities. It's hard to have that existence with your piece when you only get 1 to 2 performances and
And then, you know, maybe either it's never performed again,
or
or you
never
know,
recorded,
yeah,
yeah,
or you just it goes on a shelf and then
yeah.
stays there for another 2 or 3 years.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's why I really like writing for myself, because I can like, all right, we're gonna have a couple performances this year. I mean, who knows where I'll be, but I'll make sure it happens. Or it's why I really like writing for friends too.
Mhm. Although I would imagine that can get, if you're writing for a friend or performing a friend's piece, like if you have issues with it, it's like, do I say it? Do I risk wrecking a friendship? That's
Yeah,
I had that situation with a piece that I commissioned for myself, and I liked it, but like there were things that were in it that I like. It wasn't exactly what I wanted.
mhm.
Like I wanted it to be like a chamber piece, but one that's like featured mostly trombone.
Yeah,
And it ended up being just like almost like completely a chamber piece
yeah.
where like one of the other instruments had all the cool stuff, and I was just like, okay,
Thanks.
thanks. But you know, I liked the piece. I just didn't necessarily like my part in it, and I paid, you know, several $100s for this. I'm like,
Yeah.
Jesus, I mean, come on.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's I think a little bit like if all of a sudden you went to a business with a close friend and that wasn't part of your relationship. It's like, oh, we might actually screw each other over.
Or even just like, you know, part of part of the life of a piece is that performers make alterations over, you know, like a piece. I would imagine, you know, I don't have any documented proof of this, but I would imagine the Brahms violin concertos performed today very different than it would have been
Oh, yeah, it has to
the
be.
mid 19th century, because like performers make alterations, and then those alterations become tradition, and then like publishers start putting these alterations in the actual, you know, manuscript for the piece that goes off to be printed, and then like there's all these, you know, there's all these different editions, you know, these different publishers doing different editions. Probably the biggest example is like the Bach cello suites.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like Bach put these notes down. It's almost like a blank canvas, and there's been so many alterations through so many editions. So like when you come
even
to
some question if he wrote them.
Yeah, like did he even write them? I mean, did his wife write them?
Yeah.
Did his student write? You know, like so like when you're dealing with someone who's, you know, a composer who's like 25 years old writing you a piece, and you're like, you know, oh, maybe if I change this, and then they're like, no, I'd rather you didn't. I'm like, well, I so I'm
No.
actually curious, like what you think about that, because you're writing for yourself, but you're
Yeah.
also, so you can make alterations and no
Yeah,
one gets hurt.
there's I always kind of say my latest performance is the latest version of the piece.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, I meant to play that note a half step off, or uh,
That's now the text.
yeah. I think there's I have a few approaches working with that. When I'm working with a friend and I'm writing, uh, we generally dig into it and we talk about it a lot. Especially, I try to have as many performances with them there as possible, so we can really start to talk about it. And sometimes a certain piece, one I'll actually be playing on next week at Spectrum. Um, we've pretty heavily revised it. I mean, after maybe 15 performances of it. I mean, not like changed. I don't think an audience member would notice, but like cut out some sections and like change the timings on things. Like, but that's the cool thing of living with a piece that long. Sometimes when I get it'll be, I didn't commission. I'll just get the piece. You're playing it. I'd be like, that's just not. You don't know. You don't know that's what you didn't want. And then sometimes I just won't ask.
Right.
And if they notice, then we can talk about it. And sometimes you just have to like, it's kind of like a treasure map's an awful way to describe it, but just like you have this like instructions which are not the actual sound you hear, and you have to like deduce, especially with when you're dealing with the full range of techniques an instrument can do, and we don't have standardized ways of notation.
Yeah, it's the I don't know if you know Will Lang.
Yeah.
He's a great trombone
player.
I did an interview with him, I was like 2 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
But he also commissions a lot of music and performs it. And some of the pieces he's commissioned have started to go into a larger, into the repertoire in a small way. Well, in a big way for a 21st century piece. But he was talking about like how it sometimes takes him like months and months. It's not your typical like, you put a romantic or a baroque concerto in you can pretty much play it through after 2 times. It might not be great, but you can play everything. And he was talking about how he like takes 8 months, sometimes like 6 to 8 months, to learn and work up these techniques and figure out exactly what he's talking about. Because like you said, no standard notation for some of these, for a lot of these techniques. And there's so many. With brass instruments, there's so many ways you can go. Trombone, because you've got like the slide and you've got like all of these different things, plus in addition to and the valves, in addition to your standard like weird things any brass player can do. It's just a lot of work, and you have to make sure you're going at it constantly. Otherwise it'll just turn into something the composer definitely doesn't want.
And I think I've been thinking a lot about like learning new techniques. I really dislike the term extended technique. So for lack of a better term, I like to call them developing techniques, or they're developing for me. And it's been very interesting. I think why they're difficult is because we don't have the sound in our head. We don't know how it's really supposed to. We can't really sing this crazy shit in our head yet. And then so it's hard to do it consistently. And it takes a long time to figure out how to make that part of what we hear in our head. And then we can, it's the whole song and win thing. That's why I'm trying to apply to learning new techniques.
Right. And well, part of the reason that like playing these older solos is so, not easy, but like simplified in a way, is because a lot of them you've heard 100 times.
Yeah.
So you already know what it's going to sound like. But if you get a piece, and even with like Sam Jones just did this Stockhausen piece on a concert. He did this piece by Stockhausen called Halt. Yeah. And there's not really, to use a term that you don't like, there's not really too many extended techniques, but there's some interesting things in there. It's a really cool piece. Yeah. But like there's not, but even with that piece, like if you just grab the music and look at it on its stand with your your partners in the ensemble, you don't have that in your head from listening to it. If you haven't really listened to it before, maybe once, or like, oh, that's cool, let me grab it. like you can't just like pick it up and be like, this is how it's supposed to sound,
Yeah.
or with these different techniques, like if you don't have a recording, or composer standing right by you to figure it out, like you're just kind of on your own to like play with it until it sounds what you think is right.
I think they score, especially Stockhausen. The scores are getting so complicated. It's not for sight reading anymore.
Yeah.
It's this like puzzle you have to, or this this whole like body of a piece that you have to slowly construct over time, and then the score is a reminder for what you have to do. You basically have to have that memorized before you go in. I mean, because there's too much ink on the page to read in time,
and it's usually so big that you're like,
I kind of this idea the other week where I think they should make like a learning score, and then like somehow figure out the right way to reduce it down to. So you have very little in front of you in the performance. They're like just the reminders, like a cue card. I mean, it's probably a terrible idea.
Something you can just put on an iPad that you can just like okay, this, and this, great. I know the rest of it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So when so you started like really digging into a lot of the stuff you said when you were like a sophomore, sophomore junior at UMKC, and you obviously, because of like the what I'm looking for, the emphasis at that point, on the electronic music and all this stuff, but when did you kind of like really start thinking, this is actually something I'm really good at?
Probably my like senior year, where I had 2 senior years. Senior year / victory lap is when it.
It took me 8 years to get my undergrad degree, so I took all the victory laps. I just kept going around.
I think then, and it kind of evolved, slowly became clear. But I think it's when I started playing new music is when I really learned or started to consider how to perform any music. Because I'd always had all this baggage over me, how to play the Haydn, how to play the Hummel. And then I had to play something that no one knew. And then, there were some pieces that were just maybe too hard for me to play or something, but I kind of played them. But I was like, all right, I'm just going to like really try to emote and sell this piece of music. And people thought it was great. Like it was the best I ever played, even though it maybe wasn't. It's just I realized that we should play everything like no one knows what they're about to hear and like make it exciting.
That's interesting because like when you, like you said, you got the Hummel, the Haydn, you got those are like the two of the pillars of trumpet solo repertoire, and everyone plays it. You have to play it on auditions. You have to play it. But when you don't have that 300 years of baggage, like hovering over you, waiting to crush you, if you play the wrong tempo or you phrase the third movement of the Haydn wrong. Oh no, you were supposed to connect these 2 8th notes, not these 2 8th notes. It frees you up. And a lot of times, like you look at something, you can't play it. Sometimes that's more mental than it is your actual what your limitations are with your face or with your fingers, and so when you're playing something that no one's ever done before, you can just be like, no, this is a piece, but this is also me. And I like the idea that you can take that, if you work on that, and with these pieces that no one's ever heard before, you can take that idea and bring it back over to your standard repertoire and say something new. Maybe you can connect these 2 notes that someone said you couldn't do, and not care if someone doesn't like it.
And I think even if someone completely disagrees with how, let's say, I connected those 2 notes, like they're like, I made a decision that's wrong. But if you actually do it convincingly and are conveying some sort of emotion, people are going to enjoy it. And like that's all people want, to like get energy from you. I think that's a huge part of performing. And doing new music, I really started to think about what it means to embody a work and convey the work with your presence and just stage presence, basically, like
Yeah.
how you're acting on stage, like the actual theatrical elements of it. Some of the pieces I do, I mean, require some actual like shtick and like that, and that's fine. But like even like very serious where you're not like moving around, but there's still energy from how you're perceived
Right.
and visually. I think that adds a lot to the work,
Mhm.
and that affects, for me at least, thinking about that affects how I play
Yeah.
for the better, I think. But and then I think when I start thinking about that way, it's very easy to apply it to like Artunian or Telemon.
The thing is like with when you talk about that though, like it's a lot more work.
Yeah.
Like, you can't just roll up and bust through your Telemon. Like, you actually have to consider it. You can't approach it the way you might have as a student and been like, okay, this is here's my surface.
It's pretty in tune.
Yeah, it's in tune. The articulations are good. Here's my surface interpretation as a what the 21st century conception of Baroque playing is, or
Yeah.
but you have to really dig into it, like,
Yeah.
and decide what you want to say.
I think part of it is I don't care about any of that other stuff. I mean, I do care, and I'm very happy that people really are studying it now, especially like historically informed performance. Whenever I hear that, I love it. I think it's great. But I don't care about what's right or wrong. I care about like
what you're saying.
Yeah, and like I think there's this weird, for me it doesn't make sense. Like this like the more important pieces like the Haydn, like the more like sacred it becomes, the more right or wrong. When it's getting played so much, who cares? Do whatever you want. If someone else is going to play it the quote unquote right way, why don't you do something that no one's ever done before and like totally butcher it?
I feel I feel like in an academic setting when you're like in New York, pretty much over the last 50 years, most of the great trumpet players who've come through New York studied with Vince Penzarella.
Yeah,
and he's an incredible musician.
Yeah.
And even now can play the trumpet. He's 76 years old and can still, he doesn't play that much, but I've heard him play every once in a while.
No, yeah,
It still sounds incredible. But when you're in an academic situation like that, their job is to kind of give you these, it's hard to do these things in an academic situation because there is a fine line. There's like this line between doing what you want, like doing something interesting and new, and like just being, I think a lot of times teachers assume, and I've run into this, assume that you're like just kind of being lazy. You don't want to spend the time working on what they think you should work on, so you're doing what you call like your own version, and I actually ran into an issue with that. I was playing one piece that I like and I perform is the Bach E major violin concerto. Bum, 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 ba-da-dum, ba-dum, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, yay singing. But it's it's been in this violin repertoire. It's not a particularly difficult violin concerto, but it's it's a great piece, and it's an old classic.
Yeah.
Every violinist knows it. They probably played it in high school because it's that's when you play that. But I was doing the first movement. I did it on a recital, and then I did it in a master class with Tim Higgins, who's the principal in San Francisco, principal trombonist, youngish guy. Of course, he came through IU roughly around the same time as Weston Sprott, who's in the Met. Like, so they knew each other, and Weston brought him out. So I played this piece for him, and like I was like, oh, I don't want to do it like I did it on my recital, so I'm going to do it muted. Do it with a Harmon mute. Didn't work out because bass trombone Harmon mutes, very heavy, don't stay in the bell. Fell out before I started playing. So it was like, whatever. I've actually switched to using a tenor trombone Harmon mute because it stays in the bell and it sounds great. Anyway, but the point is like after I played most of it and it was whatever. It wasn't great, but it was still like, I don't think any trombonist has ever performed that before, so whatever. But he says afterwards, I'm glad the mute fell out of your bell because like you know what the Harmon mute is, like this like back alley grungy thing. It's like I know what a Harmon mute does. I use it for gigs. Like but he's like, I think Bach is too sacred to put that sound on it. I'm like, you need to like play this like a dance. And I was like, it's some aria da capo form. Like, it's a song. It's, you know, and that's fine. Like, this guy is amazing at what he does, and he's an incredible he's a great trombone player. But at the same time, I was like, why are you trying to, like, do this to this piece? Like, Bach has, like, influenced everyone from, you know, from romantic composers to the Beatles. Like, you know, why can't you take some, and jazz, and Duke Ellington, and, like, all these guys, like, these great jazz composers as well. Like, why can't you take some of that that Bach has influenced and like transport it back and put it on Bach? Like, why? You know, it's not like I'm just showing up and doing this just to fuck with your head. Like, I've actually considered this. Yeah. You know, like, sure, you might not like it. No one might like it. Yeah. But I'm trying it.
Yeah, I think there's and I've done I do a lot of recitals at schools. I have a lot of friends who are professors, and I've done some teaching. So I'm very or at least experienced beyond just being a student, like in the academic realm. And I think I agree with you completely. There's this huge problem that for some, and I felt this, like, school felt like a much more restricted time for me creatively than not being in school, when I think it really should be the opposite. Because when you're out of school, you need to make money. And like, maybe, you know, at my Christmas gig, I shouldn't be like pulling out the double buzz stuff or like, or trying to like.
Right. Well, that's a different situation. That's someone is paying you to do this, and then you do that. You know, they're not. If they were paying you to do a solo show, you can do whatever you want. You know.
Yeah, but I think there's this really hard, really difficult problem with teaching, especially someone in like higher education.
Well, while you were at IU, you were already doing lecturing. Were you doing some lecturing?
Yeah, I taught at Indiana University East. It's in the IU system, and I taught composition and music theory and electronic music there. But yeah, I've done a lot of like guest recital lecture things. So,
so you have like experience on both. You know, most people who are in their mid-20s don't have that much experience on both sides of the aisle, if you will.
Yeah, and I think I feel not conflicted, but it's this hard balance, because you do have a responsibility to, I think all experimentation in the best way comes from knowledge and understanding things and being aware of things. So you have this huge responsibility to impart all this knowledge, which the best way to learn it is, I think, being able to do these things, or at least become familiar with them. At the same time, the student has this incredible opportunity to make the dumbest mistakes of their life with no consequence.
But
then they should be doing that.
Right, but like we're getting with people who are like, you know, not letting you you end up with people who aren't, they're saying, sure, discover your blah 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 blah. But don't make sure you're only playing what's on the page.
Yeah, totally.
It's a weird thing. Like you it's like you said, it's a hard balance. You want people to be able to do all of this stuff, but like, you know, adding those personal tastes can be like excluded sometimes.
And I was really fortunate, especially with my trumpet teachers, Keith Benjamin, Kansas City, and John Rommel. Keith does tons of new music and like commissions. Like, he does some crazily wonderful stuff, and like one of the most open-minded, loving guys, and just he'll do anything you put in front of him on the page. But you know, he actually, this maybe this is off topic a little bit, but my first lesson, I sat down, he's like, all right, so you're studying with me, here's what you need to know to learn anything. You need a really good bullshit filter, especially with me. Anything anyone ever says to you, just assume it's bullshit.
Yeah.
Set it aside, think about it later, and then decide if it's good. Yeah. Of course, he actually said very little. Everything he said was very good because he thinks that way. But and I think he kind of treated his students like that. He would let them bring in whatever they want, and he would actually consider it and be like, "Oh, you are being lazy. Oh, you're actually trying and do something." And so he was really good about that. And John at Indiana, he was very orchestrally focused, but so open-minded about everything, was always interested in what I was doing, and so supportive. And he knew how to, okay, you're trying to do this, but I know that you can do it better,
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing.
Yeah.
So stop being late. So I'm very fortunate, but I think we need more of that because there's also just the pressure to get students out. And
yeah, I mean, it's like not any one person's fault. Like it's,
yeah,
you know, and
sometimes
okay, but it's like
Yeah.
it's a culture. It's the culture. It's, you know, and sure, it's starting to shift a little bit in different places, but like that's you know, it's hard to change tradition. It's nearly impossible to change tradition.
And job requirements are getting more and more specific.
Yeah.
Whether it's an orchestra or teaching, or and more competitive. And it's partially a responsible thing to do.
Yeah.
If you're thinking about the job market today.
Yeah.
Which interests me because I like working, but also doesn't interest me at all.
Well, yeah, it's you know, well, first, like, it's interesting. Like, the only master class I ever was at, you know, 'cause at a certain point, like, you go to a master class, you go to a lecture, you go blah blah. You know, within a certain realm, like, you're basically hearing everything that you've heard before.
Yeah,
you might be hearing just from someone different.
Totally, I've experienced the same thing. Yeah.
Which is fine, you know, but there's only been like one master class that I've been seen in the last, with the exception of David Taylor's. He's a completely separate thing. But orchestral guys, Jorgen Van Rijden from the Concertgebouw, only guy that like came in and was like, you know, he's obviously probably one of the 4 or 5 best trombone players in the world.
Yeah.
You know, tenor trombone players. And he comes in, he like plays some stuff, sounds great. He hasn't played any notes yet today, still sounds great. And he's like, well, you know, I'll tell you what I tell you. And then that same thing you're saying, you know, don't do what I'm saying just because I'm telling you. Take it, practice, play with it. And you know what? You're not me. I'm not you. If it doesn't work for you, if it's not, doesn't fit with what you're doing, it's fine. Throw it out. Just take what works for you and go with it. And, you know, and of course, like, same kind of thing. Like, very little of what he said was something you'd throw out. But at the same time, like, different artists have very different ways of approaching music. Like, he approaches things very in his specific way that works for him. Guys in the Met, they approach it in their specific way that works for them. But like, it's strange to say naive about guys who have been teaching for 25, 30 years, but it's a little naive to expect every student that you get to, you know, while there are things you can gain from everyone, but like certain people, like, not everything you say is going to be right for making them the best musician they can be.
Definitely. You know? And I think, I think anyone who's really accomplished or really great, I think they've found their unique way of approaching things.
That works for as many people as possible.
That works for as many people as possible, or just as a player, they found how they approach it. And I always think that's so interesting. And I love the idea of encouraging that sort of diversity in music. Well, of micro diversity.
Right. Yeah. Micro. But one thing I thought, and this is the first time I ever heard like a teacher say this. It was like when I was talking to Ray Rickamini, who plays in the Met. When I was doing our taping, he was like, you know, if I love orchestral music, I love it. I have loved it my entire life. If you're doing trumpet with electronics, I'm probably not the guy you want to study with because I just don't know. Like, that's not my thing. And a lot of, you know, it's weird, like, to hear a guy who has a great job and has been, you know, he's an incredible trumpet player and teaches a lot of students. It's just like, well, that makes sense. Like, why don't more teachers say that? Like, like they'll just probably, you know, a lot of teachers are just trying to shape what they can of you, you know, and you can you can go do your weird thing, whatever. But we're gonna make you into this. Yeah, you know, totally. It was interesting. It was kind of neat to hear a teacher say that. Like, you know, maybe go to someone else. It's not going to hurt my feelings. I have plenty of students. You know. But anyway, let's talk about, like, more specifically about your pieces.
Sure.
You said next Sunday, a week from today. It's funny. This is the quickest turnover I've ever had on a podcast episode. Going up tomorrow, but. Um, so you're performing some of your own
Yeah,
pieces?
2 of my own works.
And then a
Some
couple
other
other
works.
pieces
Yeah.
that have been written for you? Or
Yes.
written for you?
Not everything was written specifically for me. So my own pieces, I'm playing.
Were those written?
I couldn't find anyone better, so yeah, I had to settle and write it for myself. Uh, actually, one that we'll play at the end of this, Dysfunctions, was the first piece I wrote for myself. This was kind of the end of like that, my breakthrough I talked about. I had earlier, like, oh, I can write for myself, and I can try to move beyond the instrument, and like so it's called Dysfunctions. It's the DYS is in parentheses. So it's I based it off of a quote, a Garrison Keillor quote, Paradigm Companion, and the quote goes, "Ah, the trumpet. Now there's an instrument on which one can truly embarrass himself."
Fair enough.
Yeah, fair enough. So, and kind of the idea behind this piece, it's this really quirky piece. It gets pretty groovy towards the end, and taking like the half valve sound, and at least in classical, cultivated music, cultured music, it's not a good sound. It's a sound that doesn't have any function. We avoid it. We try not to do it.
Except for at the end of Sleigh Ride.
True. Yes.
Yeah. Make that horse sound somehow.
Yeah. But you know, it's like it's a mistake, or it's
right.
And taking this sound that's dysfunctional and basing pretty much the entire piece off of it. So most of the piece is half valve things, and making that a functional element that drives the piece forward. So that's a really fun piece to play, and I people tend to really like that. I'll probably end the program with that. I'm shuffling the program around a bit, but it's a good closer. And the other piece is for piccolo, trumpet, live electronics, and video. So we're going to have a couple of pieces with video. And this one's called Manong, which is the Native American name for the island Isle Royale, which is in Lake Superior. It's the biggest island in Lake Superior. It's a national park. And I've gone on a couple of backpacking trips there. I love backpacking. And it's fabulous. The whole island's a wilderness area. And so there's no cars out there.
It's protected.
You get off the boat.
Right.
Like the visitor center area, within like 50 feet, you're in wilderness. And it's awesome. And so I took photos and did some like field recordings there and incorporated that into the work. And then I'll play Decoherence by Christopher Biggs. He's a professor of composition at Western Michigan University. And that's another work for live interactive video. There's a little camera on me, and I'll be in the video too. And it's a really, really interesting work that it's one of my more recent commissions. It's maybe 18 months old now. Yeah, 18 months. But yeah, I've been playing it a bunch. It's great. And then a work by Per Bloland called a quintet, originally for saxophone electronics. This was not written for me, but this is a version for trumpet electronics, and it's a solo trumpet, and then you record and process sound, creates 4 more voices, and creates this quintet. It's
really cool.
Yeah, it's really neat. And then I'm doing one unaccompanied work, just solo trumpet, by Paul Hembry. He's a composer. I think he's in Illinois now, but he just finished his doctorate at University of California in San Diego. And this is a really neat piece. It almost the entire thing is a split tone multiphonics.
Oh god.
And so he wrote it. He's a trumpet player, so he's familiar with how to do it, but he never performed it. And then he wrote it. I believe for Ice was out at UCSD, and so Peter Evans read it. So it's kind of for Peter.
And that's International Contemporary Ensemble.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
I know people who work with them, but not everyone.
Yeah. And then so I think I'm the only person who's played it, like concert wise, and I've done it 4 or 5 times, and worked with Paul a bit on it. So I really enjoy that piece too, because I like split tone multiphonics. It really extends the sonic palette we can do on a brass instrument, and it can get really distorted, gritty sounding. And I kind of think like a Venn diagram. It intersects with over electronics, and I really try to not think of electronics as a separate thing. It's all sound hitting the.
It's all part of the soundscape that you're creating.
Yeah.
For that
and I have pieces that are prettier, more tonal or more less dissonant sounding than these sounds. And I think it's interesting to have that next to each other. It's like electronics doesn't mean anything. And actually, that's something I'll talk about in a minute real quick.
Yeah.
We could do a whole nother episode on that. But and then so that's everything I know I'm playing for sure. And I'll put the final program up on the Facebook event. But yeah, I'm really excited. So there'll be 2 works with video, unaccompanied work, electronics, piccolo trumpet.
So I mean, I've done work with electronics, but very basic. Like I used to do all of the run all the programming and all the electronics for the Manus's new music stuff. You know, whenever they had pieces with electronics, they're like, call Dan, he'll set everything up and make sure it runs. But when it comes to actually working in the programs themselves, if everything's ready, everything's done, I know how to like move things around and make sure they work. You know, Super Collider, Max, Ableton, whatever. But when it comes to, you know, I've done a little bit, you know, Todd Reynolds teaches at Manus, and he teaches all of that, you know, teaches all those programs, you know, the soft step, the Ableton, the Max, all this stuff. But my understanding is like a very small grain of sand in the beach that is.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
Electronic performances. Well, it's even smaller than your grain. It's very small. It's like you can't even see it without a microscope. Small. So, but like, what kind of, you know, what programs do you use and like, to integrate? I mean, a lot of these things you can use whatever one you want. But certainly are easier for different people.
That's something I believe strongly in. I'm not a. I don't like advocate you can only use this. But I use Max for everything. That being said, I think Max is wonderful. I think it's great.
Max is so difficult for my brain to wrap itself around.
Yeah, but it was for me too. But like maybe 2 or 3 years ago was finally the moment when I hit where I didn't have to relearn it every time I sat down.
Yeah.
So those first 3 years were awful.
Those first 3 years? 3 years of having... Like, who wants to spend 3 years of misery like that?
It's like learning how to walk.
I already know how to walk.
Except walking makes more sense.
A lot more.
And it works every time.
Yeah.
But, so I use Max. I do use Ableton. I think... I learned what the people around me already knew. So like UMKC, people were using Max and Digital Performer. So I learned those, and it's such a great resource. Like, my roommate at the time, Richard Johnson, he's also actually a professor at University of Western Michigan in digital media, and so I'd be like, knock on his door, hey, I don't know how to splice these 2 sounds together. He'd be like, come on. But you know, just like to show you. So it's being in kind of that community and learning it. But so even just playing back sound files now in a concert, like a fixed MIDI and a click track, I use Max because my brain got rewired that way.
When it comes down to it, like Max MSP, you can literally do anything in it. But the learning, as far as like my experience with it, the learning curve is super sharp. Yeah. Like it's, you know, there's all these people who, and if you're not the person building the patch, it can be really difficult because they know how to make everything work, and you're like, well, I know how to use Max, but every time we would get a Max patch from a composer, it was always a struggle to make sure it worked because they know exactly how to make everything like it makes sense in their brains. Like you've got the connectors, you've got this outlet, this outlet, this outlet. But for someone who's just trying to, you know, hit the big red button.
Exactly. So that brings up 2 things I'd like to mention. One, like, because I'm a performer, and even though I think I split my time 50-50 composing and performing, I've always been a trumpet player. Like that's right. I was always a trumpet player first. Like I was playing before I composed, and like I have to get up and practice every day or things stop working. Right. So it's always like in the front of my mind being a trumpet player. So I think I do bring that into my works. Like I always think, how's this going to be in rehearsal? How's the score lurk? It's working all right. Yeah, it definitely lurks. How does the score work for the performer, like functionally, not how pretty is it. Or, and granted, I love cool looking scores, but
Right.
I try to be really practical and have a performer's mindset when I'm editing and even composing. And that goes with electronics too, like making a patch that is like readily accessible to someone who has limited working knowledge of Macs. And actually, one thing I want to mention, I teach at a festival called the Splice Institute in the summers at University of Western Michigan. And it's this really, last year was our first summer for it. And it's the Summer Institute for the Performance, Listening, Interpretation, and Creation of Electroacoustic Music.
They just wanted to use Splice.
We did. And, but yeah, so Splice. And so we teach performers and composers how to write and work with electronics.
How to work together.
Yeah, actually, we talk a lot about collaboration, but so I'm on the performance faculty there. And it's hard. This big problem with electroacoustic music is that there's this really steep learning curve, and a lot of pieces can't be played unless the composer is there.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And it's also a problem for performers wanting to play this stuff.
Yeah. There was one time, I don't remember the name of the composers, some composers on the faculty at NYU, but Madeline Shapiro, who's a cellist, she's been awesome. Doing this forever.
Yeah.
You know, she runs Man's New Music, and we got the patch from the composer, and we had to have her come. Like, we never ended up performing it because one of the members dropped out and went off to work. Crazy, but like, I was at one of the rehearsals to set up all the mics and the laptop, but she had to be there, and when she opened up the patch in Max, it was just huge mass of just confusion and like it. You know, there's literally no way that me or Madeline or whoever, even with our experience with Max, could have gone in and been like, okay, so this isn't working, let me shift this to here. Great. There would have been no way.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's and I think running concerts at Indiana, there's a Center for Electronic Computer Music there. I for a few of the concerts as a technical director and dealing with a lot of different people's patches and observing all the different problems. And one, I mean, I learned from the problems I create. That's probably like the biggest thing I learned from, but seeing the problems other people create, and it's like, in that moment when nothing's working, what's that one piece of information you need?
Yeah.
Like in your face, because it's like going into like a black box, like a maze trying to find something. So,
and when you've got 5 minutes and they're starting, like, you have to either have the knowledge, you either have to have the knowledge to know what to fix, or the person creating it has to have made it simple enough, or put it in a way that you can be like, great, giving you maybe a list of potential problems.
Yeah. And as a performer doing solo recitals, I like to say I think everything's happened to me that's like every problem's come up, but I know there's thousands of problems I can't even conceive that will happen. But everyone, like, you kind of log in the back of your head, like, I didn't realize I've had a sound file that 30 seconds from the middle of it, all the audio got deleted. I don't know how it happened, but something got corrupted, but it still played back fine. And then all of a sudden the sound stopped and then came back in. I mean, I've had the weirdest stuff happen. So like now I'm like, okay, I need to I should check my sound files or but that's something we also try to teach at Splice. For like teaching a performer, for example, a performer doesn't need to know everything about Max, but they need to know like this kind of laundry list of, here's how you change your audio settings, here's how you change what outputs are going, here's how you power your mics, and here's how you open up a patch and close, like those type of things. Like, so not like starting at ground zero, but starting at like performance ground zero, which is a different
different ground.
But then also we do so you're standing in front of people. It's way harder to fix a problem when everyone's looking at you.
Because time slows down, and it feels like I had this issue. I had that kind of issue with a piece for Super Collider, and I was doing electronics. It's just flute and electronics. That was it. It was a piece called Wind Horse or something. I don't even remember. But like everything was fine. Like there was no issues. But I hit a keystroke wrong and had to like reset everything and go back and start it. Wasn't that big of a deal. I just had to like reset everything and go back. But it felt like And this was after she came up and was standing on stage, waiting for the electronics to start. And it felt like it was taking me 5 minutes to get everything set. And then I got it started, went fine.
Mm-hmm.
We shifted through everything, and it was great. She played well.
No.
And I went and said to her afterwards, "Oh, I'm sorry. Like it took, I hit a wrong key ball." And she's like, "Oh, I didn't even notice. I didn't notice that. Like it was fine. Like I didn't feel like I was standing up there." I was like, "You were standing up there for like 5 minutes," and in reality, it was probably closer to like 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah, totally. And I've learned from the mistakes where I try to fix things too quickly, and then they just break 5 minutes into the piece. And so it's my opinion, it's always worth the wait. That all said, I hate it when electronics fail.
Mm-hmm.
I totally understand. There are these highly complicated systems. Something can easily go wrong, and it's a computer.
You never know, like, if it's going to work in the hall you're in. Like, there's so many variables.
Yeah, but that means, like, I practice a lot, and I don't want to say, like, I pride myself on things working, because, I'll say that, and nothing will work on Sunday. But, because I still have problems, and everyone does. But I think it's really important as people presenting electronic music to try to troubleshoot as much as possible ahead of time.
Of course.
That's good, because
it's good advice for life.
It is. Actually, I'm kind of known for winging it with my friends, but I do really, because I care a lot about electroacoustic music, and I think it's this really interesting, dynamic, rich facet of music that I think many people could be interested in, but there are some stigmas associated with it. And that's, I'd like to not disprove, but show that it can be reliable to perform. Yeah. It does require knowledge to do. And on the other side of that, we can get to a whole, I just have to say, if I ever get a chance, I don't think electronic music is a genre as much as an instrumentation.
Yeah, that's
and it's really very important.
You're absolutely right. Because, like, for the past, 30 years, and there was someone, guy who, like, I played with the Garden State Philharmonic, it's an orchestra, but the guy who's the concertmaster there, he also plays with St. Luke's. And,
oh wow, right.
We had a performance of the Nutcracker last week, and he was saying, like, in previous years, like, people who went into, like, new music or the genre, quote unquote, of electroacoustic music were guys who couldn't hack it.
Yeah.
As orchestral musicians, and you're like, they could carve out a niche for themselves even though they weren't great on their instrument, because no one else was doing what they were doing, and they could get, and it ends up being like pretty bad new music. But now, like, you can't hide like that anymore, and and of course that was not 100% the case. But
of course not.
There were people doing that. Yeah. Nowadays, like, like you said, like people are starting to think of it more as less of this like weird niche and more of a like just a path. And I hadn't heard that before, but I like what you're saying about it being an instrumentation, not a genre.
Yeah.
Because if you think of it like that way, you're not going off and doing this weird niche. You're just adding a different instrument, and that requires you to be just at the top of your game on your instrument as well.
Yeah, and it a few things I think about that, my reactions, like I don't care if music has electronics or not. I don't care if there's video or not. Well, I like these things, but I think it's so important now to embrace this, because whether anyone likes it or not, we are dominated by technology.
Yeah.
We're just glued to our phone. You go to a concert and there's amplification, you're listening to electronic music.
Yeah.
So why don't we use these to make art? It's such a big part of our life. Why don't we just make art with it? And like, I don't think it should be like a big deal that we're doing things with electronics. Granted, like, I teach at the Sing this summer, which focuses on electronics, and like, I like to say I do trumpet electronics because I think it's awesome and I'm really passionate about it. And the other thing, this is also kind of taking what you said and distorting it, but I think there's this view a little bit that like sometimes it's people doing new music, or with electronics, can't hack it, or like
they're trying to hide something.
But okay, that could be true, and in many cases I'm sure that has been true. But as a listener, or is like someone interested in music, I think that just limits how you're going to experience music.
Yeah.
So like, I don't think we should approach it like that. And if that's happening, which I'm sure people have thought that about me, and maybe it's justified some ways or not, but like, I just don't think you're not going to enjoy music if you're listening like that.
It's just like, oh, you can't do what I do. Get out.
Yeah.
No, don't get out. Listen and spend money on it. That's what you should really do.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So this is all. You can kind of see all of this on Sunday. So this is part where this is all for David Whitwell's concert series that he's presenting at Spectrum. This is the fourth one.
Yeah.
It's next Sunday, which is January 3rd.
Correct.
3rd, yeah. January 3rd. It'll be at 3:00 Sunday. That's a
3
Sunday.
p.m. Yep.
3 p.m. Sunday. I'll be there.
Excellent. I will too.
Live streaming and such for people to watch.
Great.
121 Ludlow Street, number 2.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even have to look up the address anymore. It's going to be a lot. Another 12 of these.
Yeah.
In the next year. So I feel like I'm there. Well, I'm there once a month, but it feels like I'm there more often.
Yeah.
Anyway, but great. I mean, I'm really excited to hear.
Great.
You play live.
Yeah.
As opposed to just kind of because there's a whole it's that and just a quick tag like that. I think that's part of the difficulty is like this music with electronics is such an experience like live. It's a little more difficult to really you can listen to it if that's what you love. Like you can listen to it and be like, I can do that. This is something I can do. This is something. But as like a less, not less educated, but someone who's less familiar with that kind of aesthetic, it's really hard unless you go and just experience it.
I think this is because
and it might just be like a cultural thing.
It is a
conditioning thing.
That's exactly what I think it is. I think it is, especially when there's a performer playing an instrument, that we have like this vocabulary of what they do. Like they're doing something virtuosic and we can grasp onto that because we've experienced it enough. Or it's even if you're not a musician, it's part of our culture seeing people do these things.
Yeah.
And then you see that and you can hear that, and then you hear the things extending from that or relating to that, and that's your starting point. And when you don't have that visual element of the performance, it can be more difficult.
Yeah, unless you've already familiarized yourself with that kind of thing, then you can tell.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you can tell when you're staring at someone, you're like, oh my, what are they? What?
Yeah.
But so. Point of me saying that is to say that
it's better live.
Experiencing it live is something that you should do.
Yeah.
But Sam, thank you so much
for
doing this. This has been great. I'm really excited.
Yeah, me too.
To hear it.